Chapter 10, The Plane and the Red Skies. A computer would have to check every set or combinations of fluctuations of the magnetic field and realize faster than a human what those adjustments are. The reason is we all knew that the field is not uniform, or rather that it has highs and lows, or wells and spikes. Science already proved that. They already knew. Carl, who now worked for Intercell and the Harris Corporation as a computer tech and programmer, took that part of the project over to figure out the frequencies with a computer. I met him in Hayfork, and it wasn't hard for him to move to Florida since his job was programming. He was at the same mindset that we were at about the phenomena that demonstrated its physics in our skies. Since his Cali days with me, when we were mining partners, he had been there longer and seen things like I had seen. Drew was the skeptical type mostly. He was like many other skeptics who glimpsed something that could be explained away as something else and then dismissed as unrational or without physical proof or delusional. Their favorite saying is that it was all woo. The skeptic was going to get what he lacked soon enough. We took off one afternoon with the device attached in and through the bottom of Drew's plane. It was enclosed in a bubble of fiberglass, sort of like a gunner's cupola. After about a year of testing this device on the ground as we built it and rebuilt it, the day to test its capabilities on the plane finally came. On that day, we took off from Volcaria Airport in Florida and headed to the county's borderline, and then turned around and flew back toward the ocean and over Carl's position at the shop. We approached the 1,500-foot altitude as we flew back over Carl's and Drew's position. Then, as we approached the shop, we turned on the computer and powered up the device before we passed. We put this into a plane because we thought that the reaction would be slight, but prominent enough to show it worked, and the plane would be the power source for the device. This was the quickest way to have us on board with the device and to be fairly safe. We incorporated it into Drew's plane to basically prove two reactions. First, up and then down forcefully. As the computer ran through its programming, it found after about 2 minutes what seemed to be the right combinations of power input. Another monitor showed it was reading the fluctuations of the field, and then the main control monitor asked the question, increase power, yes/no. There was little or no deviation in the flight plan at this point. We leveled off at 1,500 feet and we all braced for the final input of power, which we were going to dial up in power slowly. We first wanted to test the upward direction, and we knew it was happening because of the direction of the flex that was already occurring as the unit spun. We didn't need to check downward if moving upward worked, but we still needed to see that happen too. That was the safest test we could do for now. As we flipped the switch, the flex doubled, which wasn't too out of parameters. The plane suddenly shuddered and was taken from an altitude of 1,500 feet to about 11,700 feet in about 5 seconds. This made us feel like we were on the fastest elevator ever made, as our stomachs seemed to move to our feet. This was a definite confirmation that we had succeeded. I looked over at Magic's expression, which was really odd. I asked him what his expression of surprise on his suddenly wide-eyed face was about. Magic looked at me and smiled and said, "I'll tell you later, mate." It was almost fear-like but joyful. "What's up?" I asked. I could always tell when he just figured out something of importance. He stayed silent and suddenly looked concerned. The plane would have kept going if Magic had not thrown the switch that disconnected its power source. As he did this, we realized our pilot, John, started having chest pains, which wound up being a heart attack. No one knew he had a pacemaker in his chest. We had all of a sudden heard his distress over the comm. The magnetic field we developed stopped his pacemaker as we flew over and out of sight. Carl heard this all as we flew over and out of sight, because all this had to be coordinated with the flyover and radio communication for filming. He acted on what he heard quickly and called 911. We didn't know right away, but it was too late. John had passed. It was a frightening moment. Our pilot was disabled, and we almost lost control as it started to nosedive. I had to take over the controls. Hell, I never flew a plane before, but I was in the co-pilot seat. I swiveled back to take control. What else was scary was the stress the plane underwent when it suddenly went straight up. The air pressure that was exerted on the top and on the tips of its wings made them flex downwards just at the beginning of the lift, and we all heard the noises from that jolt. When the plane's altitude changed rapidly, the sound seemed to come from different directions and parts of the plane. If the device was more powerful, the plane's wings might have snapped off and ripped to shreds. Magic realized it and stopped that from happening. Thank God he was watching out the window at that moment. We didn't know if we were going to make it back. We didn't know what would happen when we touched down. As I turned the plane over the ocean and headed back towards Grant, we realized we were off the flight path to land at the airport. We had to start dropping in altitude and speed to get us down again, quickly. Drew started to give me instructions on the radio when we heard it clearly again. He had to talk me down. After all, it was his plane. Even though he wasn't piloting, he knew it inside and out. He didn't have a valid license to fly at this time. That was the reason he wasn't flying on this day, but he should have been the one in the co-pilot seat. This is the only reason why we needed a legal pilot. At this point, I had no choice. We had to land it in a field behind the shop. We didn't want to stress the wings in a sudden turn back north to the airport. As he coached me, we made it back on the ground in one piece. I guess we were lucky. There was a long field behind the shop, and when we got back to the shop area, an ambulance was already on its way, as we could hear its siren coming toward us, but it was too late. They all drove out behind the shop in a four-wheeler to where the plane had stopped. Amy was in panic and came running up as soon as the 4x4s stopped. This frightened everyone and may cause us to quit the project, and I wondered what would happen next. Drew wasn't happy about what happened to his plane, but he knew the risks and rewards involved with such a discovery and took it all in stride. We never thought that this device would work so well and have such a reaction that was so forceful. After the ambulance left, we looked the plane over and found damage in its airframe, mostly where the wings are hinged and pinned to the rest of its frame. The plane would have to be dismantled for repairs. We figured it was the age of the plane that was the cause also. We wouldn't be able to use it in our next set of tests if there was going to be any next test. Any reaction would show a change on the altimeter as we recorded this so that there could be no mistaking a forced change from an outside force acting against our autopilot. We also thought it would be slight, and if it were slight, that would be something of an achievement, but this was way beyond our expectation, and the duration of the force was very short, only a few seconds. We forgot one thing as we cruised in the sky that day, that someone would see what happened on radar and that they would have a flight plan from us so we could be found, and in this case we would also have to volunteer information and somehow not give away what we were experimenting with. We also realized that we had accomplished something no one else ever has as far as we knew. We were all elated and sad at the same time. We thought about it, decided that we should dismantle the device and remove it from the plane and hide it before having to answer to investigators, since we had time because there wasn't a crash. As far as anyone needed to know, this problem was simply a medical issue with our pilot. When we were done at the hospital and all the sadness we encountered, we realized and knew that someone was going to come here from the FAA to talk to us about the landing and the death of our pilot. So we hustled the rest of what we needed to hide out of sight that night into various areas of the shop and waited. They finally came the next morning and said they came from Patrick Air Force Base. They knew where we submitted our flight plan, and then all the questions came. They were wondering what happened to us as we deviated from the flight plan and didn't answer the radio. What we didn't know was when the experiment was set in motion, the radio would not respond on that frequency. But the truth of the matter was plain once we answered and didn't attract too much suspicion. Carl was the only one quick on his feet when they asked the question about our sudden movement to a higher altitude in the amount of time that radar had recorded. We got caught up in a thermal updraft. It must have been huge to be able to take us up at that incredible speed. We were lucky, he stated. Then Magic threw in the damages that the plane sustained as a sidekicker along with his response. He said, when that happened, no one could have answered the radio because we all thought it was over, which caused John's heart attack. Then our rush to control the plane was what caused our deviation, but in the end we were lucky. They asked, John Malley was the pilot at that time? My reply was yes, John Malley was the pilot. They wrote all this down with their examination of the damages of the plane, which was sent to the FAA offices, and because of the death of the pilot, later would be included in the official autopsy report. We all agreed that the best thing we could do at this time was to lay low and see what happens next for a while. Before the wake, I had to be alone to think, so I took a short walk around the lake, thinking of all this and wondering if this wasn't a sign of bad things to come. I was wondering if we weren't supposed to dabble with this technology. After a while, we got together for a meeting, and Drew spoke up first and said John never mentioned that he had a pacemaker. Then Magic said, "You blokes know that if he had told us, we would have never let him pilot the plane, because we all know what the danger is to someone in a magnetic field in his position. For anyone that has a pacemaker in their chest, you would need shielding of sorts. It's not Mike's fault. It's not yours, Carl, or anyone's fault. We just didn't know." He added, "This is why he and I added the spiritual aspects also. Danger came from anywhere. We were as careful as we could be, but now we need to know about all of our physical conditions. This definitely can be dangerous. As we learn the capabilities and nature of what this is capable of, we need to be more careful. We are learning as we go. You know this, and none of us should shoulder all of the responsibility." We all finally settled down, sad as it was, and realized it wasn't anyone's fault. It was later that evening, when I felt better about this entire event, that we produced, but not before I broke down and cried in private as I walked around the lake again. I really liked him, and this was definitely not what I intended to happen to anyone involved. What Drew recorded of the flight on a camcorder, when we looked at the moment after the plane disappeared in the cloud, it was strange. It showed the forcefulness of its ascent upwards. This is a still from that recording. The redness came and went as fast as it appeared. It had created a vortex effect somehow when it moved through a wet cloud. We had no idea why. What we had accomplished and did that day had caused a vortex of uplift in the cloud, and the plane was gone as it sucked the cloud into its exit point, or vortex of uplift, through the middle of that circle. John's people had a wake a few days later, and it would be a couple of days later when we attended the funeral. It was a sad day, and at the same time, we were containing this jubilation that was bubbling under the surface that could hardly be contained, but we knew we had to for a while. We had to for Amy's sake, and poor Amy was in tears for days. It was the day of the funeral. As I approached the church with the rest of the guys, Amy was standing at the door to greet people in attendance, and we were the last ones to enter. She ushered us all in except for me. She held me back with one arm as she waved the others inside. It was when everyone else was out of sight on the other side of the doors, when she shut the doors and shut them in, and then suddenly slapped me across my face. She then said, "Mike, do not let this happen again." If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I would say you're full of shit. But I know better now. This is important, so don't stop. Keep going. I see something wonderful coming, but dangerous all the same. Don't you let any more of my friends die. I could only say, you know, I would have never let him fly if I had known about his condition, because I do know about that health risk. You know that, right? Yes, I do. I can read you. After what she said registered in my mind, I asked, "How do you know what I'm thinking or feeling?" "I'll tell you later," she said, and then added, "I know you better than you think. I believe you, and you are truthful. You cried, so you are not without feelings and compassion." I gave her a hug and then said, "Thanks for that. We better get in there. That's all I know and nothing else," I said as I walked in. I wondered how she knew. No one knew I cried. About a week later, during the evening at a cookout in the middle of nowhere at the shop, we were all going to witness something that just blew our minds. The children would be witnesses to what was to take place also. As we respected John in our conversations, Magic decided to pull out his infrared night vision scope and a laser light scope, otherwise a laser pointer. Both were Russian made and military issue, and he had his 6-inch telescope out for us all to check out the stars later and play with. Magic took a liking to Carl and his little brood and knew this would keep the children busy as we talked. We all looked at these visual instruments, then Magic let Carl's children check them out while explaining the science behind them, as they all wanted to participate. With them, of course. They had never seen this kind of technology in real life. It was dark when 6 stealth fighters from Patrick suddenly flew by on their way back to the base, and there were 6 of them flying by, and the night vision scope would confirm that they were stealth fighters as they were flying quite low. This night was different than usual. It was beautiful, calm, cool, and clear, and the Milky Way was clearly visible. They all flew by except for one straggler. The kids shined the laser at the trailing craft before we could tell them not to do that. It then shot down a purple beam of its own at us. It was at this point that Carl took the light from them and began looking through the night scope at a disc-shaped object. Using his words, the whole formation was already about 2 miles away when the straggler right behind them now all of a sudden shot from that position and flew by us all and over the house and our shop area at the most incredible speed. It was so fast that the eye could only catch glimpses of it, and then it was instantly back in formation in a few seconds. It was very quick and appeared as a flash or like tracers of the craft flying by, but it hesitated in front of us long enough for everyone to see it. Everyone there at that cookout saw that craft, even at that speed. 4 kids, 4 adults, and Amy didn't show up that night. Magic knew the craft he had seen because he had seen it before. He then went into the house to bring out an old book with a hard cover about this subject matter. It had terrified Carl to the point of gathering the kids and making them stick close by and retreating behind Magic into the house. It was that dramatic and scary. Magic was going to prove something with the book. There were pictures of different sightings of UFOs from different famous cases, and at that point, he then asked everyone to skim through and pick out the craft that each one of us had just seen. Everyone picked out the same picture and without hesitation. The craft that we all picked was photographed in Venezuela and in Michigan in the early 60s, 35 years before or more. Here's that picture. It was the most exhilarating and blatant display of a craft I had ever seen so far. I was overjoyed that someone else and now multiple witnesses have witnessed the same type of phenomena that I had seen before in the past. Their reactions were exactly like mine. It was a hair-raising event. As it ended, it made us wonder several things. Did the military's most sophisticated planes sense that they were being followed? 2. Whoever they are in collusion with the government, and in what capacity? 3. Who possesses this technology to begin with? 4. Were they watching our stealth planes, studying our capabilities? If the military didn't know? 5. Why now all of a sudden? Could it have anything to do with the tests we did? These were all good questions, and none of them could be answered with certainty at this time, nor would they. Amy would be informed later, first by the children, as they would radiate toward her as they always did as soon as her presence was known to them. We would now have to deal with the death of a friend first, which was bad enough, but there was the question and possible exposure of our new discovery now to consider. If we were still safe, we would have to take even more measures to keep it a secret. Next, Chapter 11, Going Broke and Cautious Thinking.